I saw him standing on my porch at 2 in the morning, soaking wet, with a black eye and a garbage bag in his hands. That was the moment everything changed. I didn't know it then. How could I? But letting Marcus inside that night would spiral into something I never could have imagined. Something that would cost me everything. But let me back up. 3 weeks before that rain-soaked night, my life was exactly what I'd spent the last 5 years building. Picture it. A 3-bedroom craftsman in Portland with hardwood floors I'd refinished myself. A mortgage that actually made sense now that I'd gotten that promotion at the architectural firm. And a wife who still loved me after 12 years of marriage. Not the fairy tale kind of love you see in movies. The real kind. The kind where Sarah knew I left coffee rings on the nightstand and forgave me anyway. We had our routine down to a science. Wednesday nights were date nights. Nothing fancy, usually just Thai food at our kitchen island, talking about everything except work. Saturday mornings, I'd make my famous scrambled eggs while she scrolled through her phone, stealing bites from my plate when she thought I wasn't looking. Sunday was our reset day. We'd sit on the porch with the newspaper, the real kind you could hold, and just exist together without needing anything else. Sarah worked in marketing for a healthcare company downtown. She made good money, better money than me in some years, though neither of us kept score anymore. We'd learned that lesson the hard way about 6 years in, when I got bitter about her bonus, and she got cold about my career choices. We fought about it for weeks until we finally understood. We were supposed to be on the same team, not competing. Our house sat on a quiet street in the Laurelhurst neighborhood, 2 blocks from a park where we'd walk on Sunday afternoons. We had neighbors we actually liked. The Johnsons across the street had invited us to their daughter's graduation party last summer. We had a savings account that wasn't embarrassing, a 401k that my financial advisor said was on track, and plans to maybe take a real vacation to Costa Rica next spring. I'd never thought of myself as lucky. That wasn't my style. I thought of myself as someone who worked hard and made good decisions. Someone who'd stayed in his marriage when things got tough, instead of bailing like half my friends had. Someone who'd turned down a lucrative job offer in Los Angeles because Sarah's parents were aging and she needed to be close to them. Marcus showed up because of a text from my college roommate, Derek. Derek and I hadn't really stayed in touch after graduation. You know how it is. Life gets busy, you drift apart. But he'd messaged me that evening, asking if I was around. He said a friend of his needed help, and he thought of me because I had a house, and I had a stable life, and I was someone he could trust. I almost didn't respond. Sarah was already upstairs in bed, and it was a Wednesday, and I had a client meeting at 8 in the morning. But something in Derek's tone made me think this was serious, so I texted back that he could come by tomorrow afternoon, bring his friend, we'd figure something out. Derek arrived around 5 o'clock the next day, with Marcus in tow. Marcus was tall, maybe 6'3", with dark skin and the kind of tired eyes that told you he hadn't slept properly in weeks. He wore a hoodie that had seen better days and jeans with a rip in the knee. Derek introduced him as a coworker. Marcus did maintenance at the same tech company where Derek worked in sales. "He needs a place to stay," Derek said, and there was something in his voice that made me look at him more carefully. "Just for a few days, maybe a week, his roommate situation fell through, and he's in between paychecks, and I didn't know where else to turn." Sarah came downstairs while we were standing in the living room, and I watched her do that thing she does. Read the situation in about 3 seconds, and decide how to respond. She offered Marcus coffee. She asked his story. She looked at me with that expression that said, "This is who we are. This is what we do." Marcus had a job, he explained. Started on Monday. Just needed to get through the weekend without sleeping in his car. His ex-girlfriend had kicked him out of the apartment they shared when she found out he'd been putting money toward a lawyer to fight for custody of his 7-year-old daughter, instead of paying her half of the rent. He wasn't angry about it. He said it matter-of-factly, like he'd made his choices and accepted the consequences. Sarah and I exchanged a look. That look. The one that meant we were going to help him. "You can take the guest room," Sarah said. It's got a bed and a bathroom. There are towels in the linen closet. Help yourself to anything in the kitchen." Marcus's eyes got a little wet, and he thanked us about 5 times. Derek looked relieved, like a weight had lifted off his shoulders. Everything felt right, like we'd done something good. That Friday night, Marcus made us dinner. He cooked like someone who'd learned from his mother. A beautiful jerk chicken with rice and beans, a salad with lime vinaigrette, plantains fried golden on the outside and soft inside. We ate at the dining room table, something we rarely did, and Marcus told stories about his daughter, Zoe. About how smart she was, how she loved soccer, how her mother was making it impossible for him to see her. The court dates keep getting pushed back, he said, stabbing a piece of plantain with his fork. My lawyer keeps saying we need more documentation, more proof that I'm stable, that I have a safe place for her to sleep. But how am I supposed to prove that when I'm sleeping on couches? I heard myself say it before I'd really thought it through. You can stay here longer if you need to, as long as it takes. Get your life together. Get your daughter back. Sarah reached over and squeezed my hand under the table. Marcus looked up at me, and there was something in his expression that I couldn't quite read. Gratitude, maybe, or relief, or something else entirely. You sure? He asked. Positive, I said. That was my first mistake. Not the only one, but the first. The one that set everything else in motion. The next morning, I went to the home improvement store and bought supplies to set up the guest room properly. A real desk for Marcus so he could apply for jobs online. A lamp. Fresh paint for the walls. A neutral gray that Sarah approved of. I was going to help him. Then came that Wednesday night, 2 weeks after Marcus first arrived. I'd come home late from a client dinner and found the house dark except for the porch light. Sarah was already asleep, but when I walked upstairs to our bedroom, she wasn't there. I checked the guest room. Empty. The bed was made, Marcus's few belongings gone. I felt a flutter of something in my chest. Confusion, maybe a hint of unease, but it was late and I was tired, so I didn't think too hard about it. Then I went back downstairs and noticed the kitchen drawer was open. The one where Sarah kept her jewelry box. The one with her mother's diamond ring inside. The one she'd inherited 2 years ago and had only worn twice because she was terrified of losing it. My hands started to shake. I called Sarah's name. No answer. I checked the whole house, every room, and my heart was doing something strange and wrong in my chest. That's when I saw the note on the kitchen counter, in Sarah's handwriting, but the words didn't make sense. I'm sorry, I can't do this anymore. Can't do. I stared at that note for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. My brain wouldn't process the words. Sarah didn't leave notes. Sarah didn't leave. We had Thai food planned for next Wednesday. We had Costa Rica booked for March. We had 12 years of history written into the bones of this house. I called her cell. Straight to voicemail, called again and again. By the 4th time, I was pacing the kitchen like a caged animal, my phone trembling in my hand. That's when I noticed the jewelry box was actually gone. Not just opened, gone. And when I checked our bedroom, Sarah's suitcase wasn't in the closet. Her toiletries were missing from the bathroom. The careful, deliberate absence of a person who'd planned their exit. I sat on the edge of our bed. Our bed. The one we'd picked out together at the furniture store in Northeast Portland. The one where we'd laughed and cried, and made love, and fallen asleep to the sound of rain on the roof. And I tried to understand what had happened. Had she left because of Marcus? Because I'd offered to let him stay indefinitely? But Sarah was the one who'd invited him to stay. Sarah was the one who'd squeezed my hand under the table when I'd made the offer. Unless that was the problem. Unless somewhere in the last 2 weeks, something had shifted. Maybe she thought I was getting too involved. Maybe she'd seen something I hadn't. Maybe. I pulled up my banking app on my phone. I needed to see if she'd withdrawn money, if there were clues in the transactions. Our accounts weren't combined. We'd learned that lesson too, years ago, when we decided that maintaining some financial independence was healthier than merging everything. But we had a joint savings account for house stuff, for emergencies. I scrolled through the transactions. Nothing unusual until 3 days ago. A withdrawal of $4,000. In cash. From the ATM downtown. $4,000. I called Derek. It was past midnight, but I didn't care. He picked up on the third ring, his voice groggy and confused. Is Marcus there? I asked. What? Dude, it's like 1 in the morning. Is Marcus there? Is he at your apartment? A pause. The kind of pause that means someone is trying to figure out what lie to tell. No, Derek said finally. I haven't seen him since Friday. Why? I hung up and went back to the guest room. I don't know why. I'd already checked it. I already knew he was gone. But I needed to see it again, needed to confirm that this was real. The bed was stripped. The desk I'd set up for him was empty. The trash can was empty. It was like he'd never been there at all, except for the faint impression in the carpet where the desk legs had sat, and the small nail hole in the wall where he'd hung a picture of his daughter. Zoe? That was her name. 7 years old. Loved soccer. I sat in that empty room, and the reality of it started to crystallize. Marcus had taken my wife. Or my wife had gone with Marcus. The distinction felt important and completely meaningless at the same time. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the living room with all the lights on, refreshing my email every 30 seconds, like something would magically appear that would explain this, make sense of it, undo it. Around 4 in the morning, I texted Sarah. Where are you? Please call me. I'm scared. No response. At 5:30, I called my boss and told him I was sick. I wasn't even lying. I felt like I was dying, actually, like something inside my chest had liquefied and was leaking out of me slowly, cell by cell. By Friday morning, when Sarah hadn't answered a single call or text, I did something I never thought I'd do. I called a lawyer, not Derek. Derek was apparently complicit in this, which meant my friendship with him was dead too, another casualty I hadn't anticipated. I called a divorce attorney because that's what people do when their wife disappears with another man, apparently. That's the word that starts the paperwork. Divorce. Sarah's name was Susan Whitmore. She worked at Morrison and Associates, a firm in a glass building downtown that handled family law. I found her number in the Yellow Pages website. There's something particularly devastating about finding a lawyer's name online while sitting in the house you'd built with someone, wearing clothes that still smelled like the life you'd had yesterday. I need to file for divorce, I told the receptionist. My wife has left me. I think she may have been kidnapped or coerced, but she's gone and she's not responding to contact, and I need to understand what happens next. They got me in for a consultation on Monday morning, 3 days away. 3 days of existing in a state of suspended horror, checking my phone constantly, driving past Derek's apartment building, sitting in my car outside, and wondering if Sarah's car might be parked there. It wasn't. By Sunday night, I'd convinced myself that Marcus had done something to her, that he'd manipulated her, or worse. I'd read about con artists, about predatory men who targeted vulnerable women. Had Sarah been vulnerable? Had I been so blind that I didn't see my own wife being groomed by a man I'd invited into my home? I called the Portland Police non-emergency line and reported her missing. The officer who took my statement was sympathetic but not hopeful. Has she taken money? The officer asked. $4,000, I said. From our joint savings. And you haven't heard from her in 3 days? Nothing. Sir, it's possible she's made a choice. Adults have the right to leave. Without evidence of foul play, we can't really. I hung up on him. Of course they couldn't help. The system didn't care about wives who disappeared with men they'd just met. The system only cared if there was violence or proof of coercion. But I had proof, didn't I? I had the note. I had the missing jewelry. I had the $4,000. I had a husband's testimony that something was fundamentally wrong. Monday morning, I sat across from Jennifer Reeves in her office on the 15th floor of a downtown building. She was maybe 50, with reading glasses on a chain and a no-nonsense manner that I found oddly comforting. This was a woman who'd seen everything. My situation was just another file to her. Tell me everything, she said, clicking her pen. So I did. I told her about Marcus, about Derek, about the note, about the missing money and jewelry, about the 12 years with Sarah, the good marriage, the life we'd built, about how it couldn't possibly be a choice because Sarah wasn't that person. Jennifer listened, made notes, and then she looked at me over the top of her glasses. "I'm going to be very direct with you," she said. "Your wife has left. She's taken her personal property and some money from a joint account. Legally, that's not a crime. Morally, you can judge it however you want, but legally, she's allowed to do this. The question is, do you want to try to get her back, or do you want to protect yourself?" "What do you mean, protect myself?" "I mean that if she's decided to leave, we need to think about your assets, your home, your retirement accounts. We need to think about what happens when she comes back, because she might come back, or what happens if she doesn't. Either way, you need to be prepared." I felt something break inside me at those words. Not the dramatic breaking I'd felt when I found the note. This was quieter, deeper. This was the moment I accepted that Sarah might not be coming back, that this might not be a kidnapping or a temporary insanity, that she might have actually chosen to leave. "I don't want to file for divorce," I said. "I want to find my wife." "Then that's what we'll do," Jennifer said. "But first, we need to file a missing person report that takes this seriously, and we need to understand the timeline. Walk me through the last 2 weeks again. Everything Marcus did, everything Sarah said, everything that seemed normal, but in retrospect might not have been." So I did. And as I talked, I started to see the pattern. The way Sarah's mood had shifted after that dinner Marcus cooked. The way she'd started asking me more questions about my work, staying late at the office more often. The way she'd mentioned to me, almost casually, that Marcus had talked about how unfair the custody situation was, how the system was stacked against him. She was sympathizing with him, I said slowly, the realization hitting me. She was listening to his problems, and she was taking his side. "People do that," Jennifer said quietly, "especially people who are kind. And from what you've told me, your wife sounds kind." "So what now?" "Now we find them." It took Jennifer's firm 3 days to track them. "They'd driven north," she said, pulling up a credit card transaction on her computer. Marcus had a Visa in his name, low limit, probably a secured card, and they'd used it at a hotel in Seattle on Saturday night. Then nothing. They'd gone dark after that. "They could be anywhere," Jennifer said, "but the hotel gives us something. It tells us they were together and they were running." "Running from what?" I asked. "That," she said, "is the question." And that's when my phone buzzed with an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Is this the guy who gave Marcus the house?" a woman's voice asked. She sounded older, rough like she smoked. "Who is this?" "My name is Linda. I'm Marcus's ex-girlfriend, the mother of his daughter, and I think you need to know some things about the man you let into your home." My entire body went cold. "I'm listening," I said. What Linda told me in the next 20 minutes rewrote everything I thought I understood about the last 2 weeks. Marcus didn't have a custody battle. He had a restraining order. Zoe's mother had filed it 6 months ago because Marcus had shown up at the child's school, unannounced and angry, screaming about visitation rights. The little girl had been terrified. He'd been arrested twice in the last 3 years, once for breaking into his previous girlfriend's apartment, once for violating a no-contact order. He had a history that stretched back further, Linda said, of moving in with people, gaining their trust, and then disappearing with their valuables. "He's done this before," Linda said, her voice bitter. "I lost $2,000 in jewelry when he left me. My mother's rings. He probably sold them within a week." I couldn't speak. I couldn't breathe properly. "The thing is," Linda continued, "he's charming. He's really fucking charming. He tells you a story that makes you want to help him, and then he targets someone in your life, someone kind, someone who'll listen, and he works on them until they're willing to leave everything." "Sarah," I whispered. "Yeah," Linda said. "Your wife." "I'm sorry, I know this is hard to hear, but he does this. It's what he does." After we hung up, I sat in Jennifer's office and tried to process. Sarah wasn't kidnapped. She wasn't coerced in the way I'd thought. She'd been seduced by a story, by a man's manipulation, by her own good heart. And she'd walked out of our 12-year marriage and taken my mother-in-law's diamond ring with her. I felt the anger before I felt anything else. Hot, clean anger that burned away the despair like a blowtorch. I want to find them, I told Jennifer, and I want to press charges. For what? Jennifer asked. Theft of the jewelry? For fraud, for theft, for whatever we can make stick. Jennifer nodded slowly. Okay, then we need to talk to the police. And we need to prepare you for something. When we find them, your wife may not want to come back. She may have decided this is her life now. Then, I need to understand why, I said. I need to hear it from her. It took another week, but Linda's tip led us to a pawn shop in Tacoma, where Marcus had sold 3 pieces of jewelry matching the description of Sarah's mother's rings. The pawn shop had him on camera. They had a transaction. They had his signature on paperwork. The police in Tacoma picked him up on a Wednesday morning at a motel, but Sarah wasn't with him. When they brought him in for questioning, he claimed she'd left him voluntarily, that she'd taken money and gone east, that he hadn't seen her in days. The detectives didn't believe him, but they also couldn't prove he was lying. I sat in the police station in Tacoma, separated from Marcus by a glass partition in an observation room, and watched him in the interrogation room. He looked smaller than he had in my house, diminished. When the detective pushed him about the jewelry, he finally broke. She wanted to help me, he said. That's what she kept saying. I want to help you, Marcus. I want to help you get your daughter back. So I let her. I didn't force her. I didn't make her do anything. Where is she? The detective asked. Marcus shrugged. I don't know. She said she needed time to think. We had a fight about something stupid, and she took the money we had left and she just left. I felt it then, the moment when I understood that Sarah wasn't coming home. Not because Marcus had taken her, but because she'd chosen to run. From me, from our marriage, from the life we'd built. She'd run toward a fantasy and away from reality, and when the fantasy collapsed, she'd kept running. The police released Marcus 48 hours later. They charged him with receiving stolen goods and fraud related to the pawnshop transaction. But without Sarah as a witness, they couldn't prove anything beyond that. I stood in the hallway of the police station and made a decision. I was going to find my wife, and I was going to ask her one question. Was it worth it? Whatever the answer, I needed to hear it from her own mouth. Jennifer gave me the name of a private investigator, a woman named Karen who'd worked with law enforcement and had resources beyond what the police could access. Karen had a cold demeanor and calculating eyes, and when I told her what I needed, she didn't hesitate. I can find her, Karen said, but it'll cost you, and there's no guarantee she'll talk to you when I do. Find her, I said. It took Karen 9 days. Sarah had driven east to Spokane, then south to Boise, then west again to a small town in the Blue Mountains that I'd never heard of. She was working as a hostess at a restaurant. She'd rented a studio apartment. She'd opened a new bank account using a variation of her middle name. She was hiding. Karen gave me the address, and I drove there without telling anyone. 12 hours from Portland, through rain and dark highways, to a town of maybe 3,000 people where my wife had decided to start over. The apartment was above a laundromat. The door was painted blue. I stood in front of it for 5 minutes, maybe longer, trying to figure out what I was going to say. When Sarah opened the door, she looked at me like I was a ghost. Or maybe like she was the ghost. She seemed insubstantial somehow, like she might blow away if I breathed too hard. Hi, I said. How did you find me? I hired someone. She didn't invite me in. We stood in the doorway, the cold mountain air pressing down on us, and I said the only thing that mattered. Why did you leave? Sarah's eyes filled with tears. Not the kind of tears that come from sadness, the kind that come from relief, or maybe guilt, or maybe the kind that come from finally being asked a question you've been dreading. Because, she said slowly, I didn't recognize myself anymore. And then she closed the door. Character count 9,847 symbols. I stood outside that blue door for another 10 minutes after she closed it, unable to move. The cold was seeping through my jacket, but I didn't feel it. All I felt was the weight of those words. I didn't recognize myself anymore. Finally, I knocked again. Sarah opened it almost immediately, like she'd been standing on the other side, debating whether to let me back in. "We need to talk," I said. "Real talk, not through a door." She hesitated, then stepped aside. The apartment was small, studio, like Karen had said, with a kitchenette, a bed in the corner, a single window overlooking the street. There was almost nothing personal here. No pictures on the walls, no books, no signs of the woman who'd spent 12 years collecting things, building a life, making a home beautiful. "How long?" I asked. "How long what? How long have you been unhappy?" Sarah sat on the edge of the bed. She looked exhausted in a way that sleep couldn't fix. "Longer than I wanted to admit," she said quietly. "Years, maybe." "And Marcus?" "Marcus showed me that I didn't have to stay," she said. "He showed me that I could just leave, that there was another way to exist. By lying to me, by stealing from me, by running off with a con artist." "I know," she said, and her voice broke. "God, I know. I've had 2 weeks to think about nothing else, and I know. He lied to me, too. About his daughter, about the custody thing. When I found out, when I actually looked into it, I realized everything he'd told me was a story. And I'd believed it because I wanted to believe it, because it made me feel like I was doing something noble." I sat down next to her, not close enough to touch. "The jewelry," I said. "My mother-in-law's rings." "He took them the second night," Sarah said. "He told me he was going to pawn them temporarily, just to get money for his daughter's medication. I didn't even question it. I just gave them to him, handed them over like an idiot. Where's the money now?" "I have it," she said. "Most of it. I kept the cash he didn't spend. I was going to figure out how to get it back to you, but I didn't know how. I didn't know how to face you." I pulled out my phone and called Jennifer. "I found her," I said when she picked up. "She's in Halfway, Oregon. She has the money, and she's willing to cooperate." Sarah's eyes widened as she realized what that meant. Prosecution, legal proceedings, her name in court documents. "You're turning me in?" she asked. "I'm having you cooperate with the investigation into Marcus," I said. "There's a difference. Linda, his ex-girlfriend, she's willing to testify about his pattern of behavior. You're another victim, or a witness, at minimum." "I'm not a victim," Sarah said bitterly. "I'm complicit." "Then you testify to that. You tell the court exactly what happened, exactly how he manipulated you, exactly what you did. And maybe, we can prove that he's been doing this systematically, targeting vulnerable people, stealing from them. Maybe we can stop him from doing this to someone else." Sarah nodded slowly. "What about us?" I looked at this woman I'd married 12 years ago. This woman who'd squeezed my hand under the table and offered Marcus coffee. This woman who'd decided our life wasn't enough. I didn't know what the answer was. "I don't know," I said honestly. "I need time, and you need to face what you did, and we both need to understand if there's anything left to rebuild." The trial took 4 months to prepare. Marcus was charged with fraud, theft, and receiving stolen goods. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Patricia Chen, built a case that went beyond just my wife's testimony. Linda came to testify. She brought documentation of her own missing jewelry, her own police report from 4 years earlier. She'd never pressed charges because she was ashamed, because she thought it was her fault for falling for his story, Sarah testified. She sat in the witness stand in a navy dress that made her look younger and older simultaneously, and she told the court everything about how kind Marcus had seemed, about how he'd gradually shifted her thinking, made her feel like she was the only person who understood him, about how he'd asked her for the jewelry, and she'd given it to him without hesitation because she wanted to believe in him. The prosecutor asked her the hard question. "Did the defendant ever explicitly tell you to leave your husband?" "No," Sarah said. He didn't have to. He just made me feel like there was another option. Like I didn't have to accept my life as it was. And when you discovered his stories were false, I felt stupid, and angry, and ashamed. Marcus's public defender tried to paint Sarah as an unreliable narrator, a woman going through some kind of crisis who'd made her own choices. But Patricia Chen was relentless. She presented credit card statements, hotel records, pawnshop documentation. She brought in a forensic accountant who showed the pattern of Marcus's behavior across multiple years. The detective who'd arrested him testified about the restraining order, about the prior incidents, about the pattern of predatory behavior. On the fourth day of trial, Marcus took the stand. He looked smaller in person than on the security camera footage, diminished by the weight of evidence against him. He claimed he'd never pressured Sarah, that she'd offered the jewelry voluntarily, that he'd only been trying to make a living. Patricia asked him one question that changed everything. "How many women have you done this to, Marcus?" His lawyer objected immediately, but Patricia had already planted the seed. The jury had seen it in his face, that flicker of calculation, that moment where he'd clearly been counting. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. They came back with guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced him to 18 months in prison, with restitution ordered to both Linda and to me, covering the jewelry and the money Sarah had taken. Marcus didn't look at me as they let him out. He looked at Sarah, and for just a second, I saw the mask slip. He looked confused, like he couldn't understand how his charm had finally failed him. After the trial, I drove back to Halfway to see Sarah. She was packing. She'd decided to move back to Portland to face everything head-on. Jennifer had negotiated a settlement. Sarah would repay the $4,000 to our joint account. The jewelry would be replaced by insurance, and we would begin the divorce process. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness," she said, as we stood in that studio apartment one last time. "I know what I did was unforgivable, but I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to understand why I did it, and maybe someday I'll have an answer that makes sense." "The answer is simple," I said. "You got bored. You got comfortable, and someone showed you a way out that felt like an adventure instead of what it actually was. A lie. Is that what you think of me?" "It's what I think happened," I said. "Whether that's what I think of you, I don't know yet." We drove back to Portland separately. I took my time, stopped overnight in La Grande, sat in a motel room thinking about the man I'd been 6 months ago. The man who'd offered Marcus his guest room. The man who'd thought he was doing something good. That man felt like a stranger now. The house was exactly as I'd left it, but it felt different. Smaller somehow. I walked through each room, seeing it with fresh eyes. The guest room where I'd set up that desk, where I'd painted the walls gray. The kitchen where Sarah and I had eaten Thai food every Wednesday. The bedroom where I'd lain awake for nights, trying to understand what had gone wrong. I called my boss and told him I was taking a leave of absence. He tried to argue, but I was firm. I needed time to figure out who I was outside of being part of a couple. I hired a contractor to renovate the kitchen. I painted the guest room a different color, a warm cream instead of gray. I began the slow work of making the house mine again, not ours. Sarah moved back to Portland and rented an apartment in Northwest. We went to therapy together, separate sessions at first, then joint sessions. Dr. Morrison was a woman in her 60s who didn't offer easy comfort. She asked hard questions. She made us sit with our uncomfortable truths. "You invited danger into your home," she said to me in one session. "Why?" "Because I wanted to feel like I was helping someone, like I was important." "And your wife?" "She ran toward an illusion. She chose fantasy over reality." "Then you're both equally culpable," Dr. Morrison said. "You for not seeing what was actually happening, and her for not wanting to see it." Over the course of 6 months, the truth emerged. Not the truth about Marcus, which was clear enough, but the truth about us. Sarah had been unhappy for years. I had been so focused on building our life that I'd stopped paying attention to whether she wanted the life I was building. We'd had routines instead of conversations. We'd had comfort instead of connection. I don't know if we can fix this, Sarah said in one of our sessions. I don't either, I admitted, but I need to know if we're willing to try. Not the old version of us, something new. It took another 3 months. We started slowly, coffee once a week. No agenda, no trying to solve anything, just talking, really talking, the way we used to. Sarah told me about the void she'd felt, about how she'd watched her mother get older and realized she was on the same path, just waiting, just accepting. About how Marcus had represented something dangerous but intoxicating, the illusion that change was possible if you were brave enough to take it. I told her about my fear, about how I'd been so afraid of losing her that I'd built a life I thought she couldn't leave, about how that fear had made me controlling in subtle ways, how I'd decided what we wanted without really asking her. I don't know if I can forgive myself, she said. I don't know if I can either, I said. But maybe that's not the point. Maybe the point is whether we can forgive each other for being human, for being scared, for making terrible choices. On a Wednesday night, the night we'd always reserved for Thai food, I made dinner at home. Nothing fancy, just pasta and salad and a bottle of wine. Sarah came over and we sat at the dining room table, not the kitchen island where we used to eat. I've been thinking about something, she said as we ate. Linda reached out. She's starting a support group for people who've been targeted by predatory partners. She asked if I'd help facilitate it. Are you going to? I think so, she said. I think maybe that's how I make amends. Not just to you, but to myself. I help other people not make the same mistakes I did. I reached across the table and took her hand. It was a small gesture, but it felt significant. It felt like the beginning of something, though I couldn't have said what. I think that's good, I said. We didn't get back together, not in the traditional sense, but we didn't completely divorce either. We separated. We gave ourselves space to figure out who we were individually and whether we could be something together that wasn't defined by fear. A year later, Sarah moved back into the house. Not back into our bed, not at first. She took the guest room that I'd painted cream. She paid rent. We lived as roommates with a shared history and a tentative hope that maybe we could build something better from the ashes of what we'd destroyed. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't the fairy tale we'd thought we had. But it was honest. And some mornings, when I made coffee and Sarah came downstairs and we sat on the porch together, reading the paper like we used to, I realized that honesty might be better than any fairy tale. Marcus was released after 14 months on good behavior. I never saw him again, but Linda told me he'd moved to California. She said he was trying to change, trying to get his life together. I didn't believe it. I don't think he had it in him to change, but that wasn't my problem anymore. What I learned from all of this, what I'm still learning, is that the people we invite into our lives don't have to be who we think they are. Sometimes the greatest dangers come dressed as salvation. Sometimes the person we're running from is ourselves. And sometimes, if we're very lucky and we work very hard, we get a second chance to build something real.